I used to love that corner table, the one near the window with the slightly uneven leg and a view of Maple Street. I'd sit there most mornings, long after breakfast dishes were done, with my cardigan wrapped tight and a cup of tea cooling in my hands. From that window, I watched seasons change, neighbors age, and the same dog bark at the same fence for nearly 15 years. Tom used to sit at that table too. When he was little, he'd bring me clumsy drawings and eat his toast there while kicking his legs under the table. He once asked me why toast always lands butter side down. I told him life was funny like that. Sometimes the mess chooses you. He laughed so hard his juice went up his nose. That table saw a lot. Birthday cakes, quiet arguments, long silences. It was where I found out about my sister's stroke, where I waited for my husband on the night he never came home, and later where I started eating alone. But that particular evening, I don't know why I remember it more than others. Maybe because I felt it before I understood it. The air felt strange, not cold exactly, just distant. I had just made tea, the good kind, with the little honey tubes I saved for company. I had hoped maybe Rebecca or Jeremy would stop by. They'd been meaning to, they said. But it was just me and the creak of the radiator. Then I heard the door open, footsteps, slow and unfamiliar. I turned, half expecting the plumber I'd called last week, but it was Tom, my son. He looked older than I remembered, not just the hair, thinner, grayer, but the way he held his shoulders, tighter, less open. He didn't smile when he saw me. "Mom," he said. I smiled. "Tommy, I didn't know you were coming." He didn't take off his coat, didn't sit down, just glanced around the room like he was checking for damage. "I need to talk to you," he said, the kind of sentence that makes your spine straighten. I nodded and gestured to the chair across from me. He didn't sit. Instead, he pulled out a folder from under his arm, thick, heavy. He placed it on the table like it might fall apart. "There's been some changes," he said, "with the house, with things moving forward." I didn't understand, not then. He started explaining, words like consolidation, equity, long-term care. But what I heard, what echoed through that kitchen louder than his voice, was something simpler. He wasn't here for tea. He was here to move me out. He wanted to sell the house Tom grew up in, the one with the pencil marks on the doorframe measuring his height, the one where we buried the dog's ashes under the oak tree. I didn't say anything for a long time, just stared at him, the same way I used to stare when he came home with scraped knees. Only this time, it wasn't blood. It was something colder. "I thought we'd agreed," he said, quieter now. "This place, it's too much for you. You shouldn't be alone here." I looked down at my tea. The honey cube had melted. "And where would I go?" I asked. "There's a place, Sunrise Villas. It's nice. They have activities and nurses on site. Rebecca helped me find it. She thought—" I raised my hand gently. Enough. He meant well, I think. At least part of him did. But there was something else in his eyes. Urgency. A shadow of calculation. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just reached across the table and steadied the folder. "You always liked this table," I said. "Remember? You used to sit here with peanut butter on your chin." He looked away. The silence between us stretched so long it almost broke. I took another sip of tea, lukewarm, a little bitter. "I'll think about it," I said, finally. He nodded, too quickly, gathered his coat, his folder, his keys, left with the same quiet urgency he arrived with. The door shut softly behind him. I sat there a long time after. The streetlight flickered on. A dog barked somewhere down the block. I traced the ring my mug had left on the table and let the cold come in. Not the winter kind, the other kind. The kind that settles in their chest and doesn't leave when you shut the window. They never liked the coat. Rebecca once called it tired looking. Jeremy said it made me look smaller, like I was disappearing. And Linda, sweet, well-meaning Linda, she offered to buy me a new one. Something warm and stylish, Mom, something softer. But that coat was softer than they'd ever know. It wasn't beautiful, not anymore. A muted gray blue with worn cuffs and a button I'd replaced 3 winters ago with one that didn't match. But when I slipped my arms into it, I remembered. Not the day I bought it, I didn't buy it, but the day I let go of something else so I could have it. It was winter, cold, brittle, biting. Calvin had lost another job, and the rent was already 2 weeks late. We had 2 babies then, both sick with coughs that rattled through the night. The heater barely worked. I'd boil water just to steam the room and wrap them in blankets warmed by the oven. My wedding dress was still in the closet then, ivory silk, stitched by my aunt's tired hands. I hadn't worn it since the day I walked down the aisle with a heart full of foolish hope and second-hand heels that pinched my toes. It still smelled faintly of lavender and nervousness. The pawn shop gave me $28 for it. They gave me 6 more for the pearls my mother left me. And that same day, I bought the coat. Not because I wanted to, because I had to. The coat lasted. Longer than the dress, longer than the heater, longer than the hope I once had that Calvin would stop running when things got hard. I wore that coat to walk Rebecca to school when her shoelaces kept untying. I wore it when I sat on cold benches during Jeremy's soccer games, cheering even when they lost 8-0. I wore it to every job interview, every night shift, every bus ride that carried me farther from who I thought I'd be. I even wore it to my mother's funeral. There's a stain on the right sleeve. Tomato soup, I think. One of the kids spilled it on a Tuesday I can't forget. We didn't have money for meat, so I made soup 3 nights in a row. On the 3rd night, Rebecca cried and asked why we couldn't eat like the other kids. I didn't have an answer, only a soft apology and the same story about how real food wasn't always on plates. Sometimes it was in the way we showed up, the way we stayed. When Calvin left for the final time, I was wearing that coat. He didn't say goodbye, just left a note, barely 3 lines long. Something about needing space, needing to breathe. I read it at the table by the window, the one that leans. The coat was draped over the back of my chair. I remember reaching for it before I even thought to cry. It's funny, isn't it? The things we reach for when the floor gives out. That coat has heard every version of my silence. The proud kind, the bitter kind, the kind that wraps around you so tightly it feels like a second skin. I remember once, maybe 2 winters ago, I was waiting for the bus, holding my grocery bags in one hand and my coat closed with the other. A woman next to me, young, fresh-faced, scrolling on her phone, glanced at me and smiled politely. "You look cold," she said. "I'm all right," I replied, adjusting the collar. She didn't know the coat had lined cribs and wiped tears, that it had caught the rain when I couldn't afford an umbrella, and held letters I never sent. That it smelled faintly of cinnamon because I always kept mints in the pocket for the grandkids. They see an old woman in a worn coat. I see a life that refused to unravel. Tom asked again last week if I'd let them donate it. "There's no need to hold on to it, Mom. It's not doing you any good." I nodded like I always do. Let the conversation pass like traffic outside the window. But later that night, when everyone had gone home, I took it out from the hook by the door, sat with it across my lap, touched the frayed edges like they were lace. The dress I wore down the aisle is long gone. So are the pearls, the promises, the man I married. But this coat, it stayed. I met Lisa on a Sunday. Tom brought her by without warning, one of those surprise visits where you're supposed to be flattered, not caught off guard. I was wearing my apron, flowers still on my hands. I remember wiping them on a dish towel before I offered to shake hers. She didn't take it right away, just glanced at it like I'd offered her something used. "Hi, Mrs. Emery," she said. Polite, polished, practiced. And that smile, straight as a ruler, just wide enough to count as kind, but it never touched her eyes. I made tea, brought out the good cups. She didn't drink hers, said she didn't do caffeine after 4. Tom laughed, tried to soften it, but I could already feel the chill settling between us like draft under a door. That first visit lasted 47 minutes. I know, because I counted. Not the minutes exactly, just the silences. I tried. Lord knows I tried. I sent her birthday cards with careful messages. I offered help when she was pregnant with Haley. I knitted a blanket, blue and white, soft as clouds. She never used it. When I asked, she said it didn't match the nursery theme. There are 100 little ways a person can tell you you're not wanted. Lisa never raised her voice, never said anything outright cruel. She was too smart for that. too careful. But her disapproval showed up in pauses, in the way she corrected me, gently, always gently, when I told the children stories. Actually, Haley learned to walk at 11 months, not 10. No, Ethan's allergic to peanuts now, didn't Tom tell you? I once brought over soup when she was sick, drove through the rain to leave it on the porch. She sent a thank you text, 4 words long. Thanks, we're all set. Tom said she was just reserved, said I took things too personally, said I had to give her space. But I knew. Love doesn't hide behind closed doors when your hands are full. Thanksgiving became awkward. She'd assign me a dish, something small like cranberry sauce, and then remake it just in case the kids don't like tart. I wasn't asked to carve the turkey. I wasn't asked to stay late. One year, she forgot to put my name on the place card, said it was an accident. But even Haley noticed. She whispered, "Grandma, where do you sit?" And I just smiled and said, "Anywhere, sweetheart. I like to float." It wasn't the forgetting that hurt. It was the knowing that it wasn't forgetfulness at all. Lisa made a home that never had space for me in it. I was a guest, sometimes invited, sometimes tolerated, but never family. Tom tried to bridge the gap. I saw it in the way he looked at me during dinners, tried to fold me in. But love doesn't survive on glances alone. One day, after a birthday lunch for Ethan, I had brought a book, wrapped in brown paper with twine. I caught Lisa cleaning up in the kitchen. She didn't hear me at first. Her back was to me. "I know you don't like me," I said quietly. She turned, blinked. "What?" I said, "I know. You've never liked me. You've been kind, yes, but not warm." She looked at me like I'd spilled something, like I'd broken a rule we weren't supposed to name. "I've always been respectful," she said. I nodded. "Yes, but respect isn't the same as welcome." She didn't answer, just went back to drying dishes, carefully, slowly. That was the closest we ever came to honesty. I never repeated it, and she never softened. The last Christmas I spent with them, she bought me a wool scarf. Still had the tag on it. Burgundy. Expensive, but not me. I smiled, said thank you, folded it back into the box. It sits in my closet now, unworn, still wrapped, like her kindness. Lovely on the outside, never meant to be opened. I knew the coat was on borrowed time the minute I walked through the door. Lisa opened it with a strained smile, the kind you practice before company arrives. "Oh, you wore the coat." Her voice lifted at the end like a question, but the tone was already an answer. I smiled, brushed off a leaf caught in the collar. "It's chilly out." Tom appeared behind her, already distracted, already apologizing with his eyes. "Dinner's almost ready," he said, reaching for the grocery bags I brought. I held on to them. The table was already set. Too many forks, napkins folded like hotel linens, a small place card at my seat, written in a font that looked printed, not personal. "Mom," it said. Not Mama, not Grandma, just Mom. I hung the coat on the back of the chair, my chair. Jeremy arrived last, loud as ever, with his new girlfriend, Bree, I think. Young, glowing, the kind of person who uses words like vibes and energy instead of feelings. She hugged me like someone hugs their boss's aunt. Polite, hollow. Dinner began the way these things do. Too many voices talking at once. Stories about work, new recipes, a home renovation project that involved removing a perfectly fine wall because the feng shui was off. I sat quietly, spooning potatoes onto my plate, nodding where it felt expected. I offered to pass the rolls. No one took them. Then it happened. Jeremy leaned back, eyes squinting toward me. "Wait, is that the same coat? The one with the button from Dad's old flannel?" He was smiling, maybe even trying to be playful, but something in his voice flattened the memory. Bree laughed softly. "That's vintage, right?" And then Lisa, not even looking at me, said, "She still wears that thing?" It wasn't a question. The laughter that followed wasn't cruel. It was casual, and somehow that made it worse. I smiled, just enough to keep the air from shifting, picked up my fork, took another bite of green beans. No one noticed my hands shaking slightly. Or maybe they did and chose not to. I didn't cry. I didn't glare. I didn't say a word. But something moved inside me, quiet and deep, like old ice cracking underfoot. It wasn't hurt. I've known hurt. This was older, heavier. It was the sound of being seen and still not known. That coat, it had cradled their scraped knees, wiped their sticky fingers, held grocery receipts and love notes I never sent. It had walked miles for their medicine, stood in the cold for parent-teacher conferences, waited in emergency rooms. It had grown thin from wear, but it had never grown thin from love. They didn't know that. Or maybe they did once, and forgot. I looked around the table. Lisa was telling Bree about her new Vitamix. Jeremy had his phone out. Tom was refilling wine glasses, avoiding my eyes. I pressed my palm flat against the tablecloth. Crisp, ironed, without a single wrinkle. When the cake came out, I politely declined, said I was full. Truth is, I'd lost my appetite halfway through the roast chicken. Not from the food, but from the realization that I didn't fit here anymore. Not in this curated, candlelit version of family. After dinner, I stood to help clear. Lisa waved me off. No, you just sit. We've got it. So I sat, in silence, wrapped my fingers around the arms of the chair like I was holding on to something invisible. Eventually, I stood, put on my coat. The familiar weight of it settled on my shoulders like a friend's hand. I didn't say much on the way out, just smiled, thanked them, kissed Jeremy on the cheek. Tom followed me to the door. He didn't say what I think he wanted to, just pulled me in for a quick hug. "I'll call you tomorrow," he said. I nodded, but we both knew he wouldn't. It was a small place at first, a square little brick building with cracked windows and a roof that needed redoing. Calvin called it a hidden gem, though all I saw back then was rot under the floorboards and the smell of something burnt that wouldn't leave the walls. He had the dream, I had the savings. He talked about bistro lighting, warm pies, hand-lettered menus. I said nothing at first, just nodded, smiled, wiped flour from my fingers, and made room in the budget. The jam money went first, then the sewing tin, then the tiny stack I'd saved for new shoes for the kids, though I never told them that part. I remember the night I signed the loan papers. Calvin was too nervous, said his credit wasn't strong enough, so mine would hold things down. I wasn't sure what that meant, but I signed. We called it Emery's Kitchen, my last name, my hands, my money. And when the first table came in, heavy oak, scratched but strong, I ran my hand along it and said, "We'll feed people here." For 3 years, I cooked until my fingers blistered. Calvin did the talking, the glad-handing. He wore clean shirts and learned how to pour wine without looking. I scrubbed pans until my knuckles bled and cried into the mop water after we locked up. We hosted anniversaries, birthdays, after-church brunches with too many children and not enough napkins. People smiled when they walked in. They felt welcome. That was me, my touches, my cinnamon in the apple pie, my cloth napkins stitched by hand. But then things changed. Calvin started coming home late, or not at all, said he was networking, building connections. I found lipstick once on a receipt in his coat pocket. When I asked, he said it was from a customer who kissed the check before tipping. I laughed, but not really. And then came Lisa. She was just a hostess at first. Bright smile, clean nails, quick with compliments. I didn't dislike her then. She was just young. When Calvin left, quietly, without ceremony, he took his suit jackets, a box of records, and his half of the business. He left the bills, and the debt, but not the table. Not that first table. That stayed. Tom was already grown by then, said he'd help manage things. Lisa was in the picture by then, no longer a hostess, not quite family. She started changing the menu, changing the decor, called it freshening the place up. Fresh, I suppose, meant removing anything that looked like me. The gingham tablecloths disappeared, so did the wall with customer notes and old thank you cards. The pies were replaced with soufflés. The music got louder. And one day, quietly, the sign changed too. It just read, "The Emery." They told me it sounded more modern, more elegant. "You should be proud," Lisa said with that smile like polished chrome. "Your name still carries weight." But the kitchen no longer smelled like cinnamon. They kept a table for me, in the back, near the restrooms. I came once a week, sat quietly, ordered the same thing, tea and soup, though it no longer tasted like mine. And then one afternoon, I overheard Lisa talking to the wine distributor, laughing. "Oh, she's sweet," she said, "but you know how it is. She's just family, not really involved. She just likes to feel included. Just family, not really involved. I stirred my soup, slowly. One hand resting on the corner of the table I'd help sand myself. That night, I went home and opened the drawer where I kept the papers. The original deed, the loan documents, the receipt from the oak table with the ink still smudged from my thumb. My name in pen, not pencil. My signature on every dotted line. I may not have been in the glossy brochures or the Instagram posts, but I was written into the bones of that place. They thought I was just a guest, but the walls remembered my hands. Harold left on a Wednesday. It wasn't unexpected. His lungs had been failing for months, and the house had gone quiet in that particular way that always comes before a final breath. I'd sat beside him most nights, reading cookbooks out loud, even when he didn't respond. I'm not sure why. Maybe I hoped the sound of recipes would remind him of better things: cinnamon rolls in the fall, stew bubbling on the back burner, laughter folding into steam. When he passed, there wasn't much left. The life insurance had lapsed, the mortgage was behind. What remained was a garden out back, overgrown but stubborn, and a few drawers full of old receipts and empty pens. I remember standing in the kitchen the next morning, pouring myself a cup of coffee that tasted like burnt endings, staring out at the wilted tomatoes I hadn't had the heart to pick. There was no breakdown, no dramatic sobbing, just silence, then motion. Because grief doesn't pause the rent. I took a job washing dishes at the very restaurant Calvin and I used to own, Emery's Kitchen, though by then they'd removed the kitchen and most of the history with it. Tom had stepped back, Lisa ran the books, and I was just Mrs. Emery to the new staff. Quiet, punctual, disposable. They didn't know I used to pick out the spices, that I once stood behind that counter shaking hands and remembering every regular's order by heart. But none of that mattered. I kept my head down, took the late shifts, and worked fast. Quiet hands, quiet mouth. That was the rule. The pay was small, barely enough for groceries, much less the house. So I started sewing again. Curtains mostly. Sometimes dresses. Once a full wedding gown for a woman whose mother had passed away and wanted it stitched from her mama's old bed sheets. I cried when I finished that one. She never knew. Then came the jam. I'd been making it for years. Plum, raspberry, strawberry, lavender when I was feeling fancy. At first, it was just for friends, neighbors. Then someone left a review on Facebook. Suddenly, I was filling small brown paper boxes for strangers across town. I worked mornings in the kitchen, evenings with a needle, and late nights over boiling pots of sugar and fruit. My hands were always sore, my feet swelled, but I never stopped. Every month I set aside a little. Not much, sometimes just $20. But I kept a ledger. Pennies turned into pages. 2 years in, the building went up for sale. Not just the restaurant, the whole corner unit. Lisa called it an investment opportunity. She and Tom were thinking of selling their share. I didn't say much, just nodded, asked a few quiet questions. And then, later that night, I called Mr. Hanley, the man who handled their books. "Would you sell to me?" I asked. He paused. "You're serious?" "I've never been more." It wasn't enough at first, my offer, but Mr. Hanley, bless him, had known me for years. He remembered the pies. He remembered Harold. He gave me terms. I signed the paperwork on a cold Tuesday morning, wearing the same coat they all hated. My hands shook, but the ink dried just the same. They didn't know, not right away. Tom called a few days later, said Lisa had found a buyer, some couple from out of town. "Oh," I said, stirring my tea, "that might be tricky." "Why?" "Because I own it now." Silence. Then, "You what?" "I bought the building last week." He didn't speak for a while. When he finally did, his voice was quieter. Not angry, just confused. "How?" he asked. But I didn't answer. Not because I couldn't, because I didn't want to explain how it feels to survive quietly while everyone assumes you're fading. They'd never noticed how I kept moving, even with grief in my chest and blisters on my hands. They'd never asked, and I never offered. Until now. It didn't happen all at once. There wasn't a loud door slam or a cruel word that told me I wasn't needed anymore. No, it was quieter than that, softer, like dust settling on furniture no one bothers to wipe. I remember the first time I noticed it, Jeremy's birthday, my oldest grandson. I used to bake his cakes myself, lemon with raspberry filling. He'd beg for it, even when he was too old to say the word beg out loud. But that year, no one called. I found out through Rebecca's Facebook. She posted a photo of him blowing out candles on some store-bought cake, vanilla, dry and forgettable. I sat at my kitchen table that night, the lemon zest still sitting in a bowl, untouched. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I'd made a pot of chicken stew and set the table for 4. Grace had mentioned dropping by with the boys. If we're free, she'd said. They weren't. The stew cooled, I ate alone. And when I put the leftovers away, I said out loud, to no one, maybe next week. That became a habit, talking to no one. You know, people think old age is loud with complaints, aches, pills, coughing, slippers dragging across wood floors, but it's not. It's quiet. It's your phone not ringing. It's not being asked to bring anything to Thanksgiving, just told what time to arrive and when to leave. I used to be the one who made the list, who hosted, who cooked until my feet swelled and my back screamed. I didn't mind. I liked watching everyone eat, even if I barely touched my own plate. That was love to me, feeding the people I made with my body. And now I'm the one they call only when something breaks. Babysitter, ride giver, emergency backup. They think I don't notice, but I do. There was one night, winter, maybe February, when Tom called at 6:30. Linda stuck at work. Can you come sit with the kids? It had snowed all day. The steps were icy. I hadn't eaten. My hip was stiff. But I went. Of course I went. And when I got there, the kids were already in their pajamas, watching cartoons. No one looked up when I walked in. No one hugged me. The dinner plates were still on the table. Cold pizza. A mess. I sat there for 2 hours while they watched a screen. No one asked me how I was. When Linda came home, she didn't even take off her coat, just nodded and said, "Thanks," before heading upstairs. I stood in the doorway for a moment, my coat still unzipped, my gloves in my hand. Then I stepped outside and let the door close quietly behind me. The snow had stopped, but the cold clung to my cheeks like memory. I drove home in silence, didn't even turn on the radio. That was the night I stopped picking up right away. I let the phone ring. Sometimes I didn't call back. And still, no one asked why. I know I'm not perfect. I've made my share of mistakes. I raised my voice when I should have listened. I tried to fix things with soup and sweaters when maybe they needed silence or space. I held on too tightly. But I showed up. Every time. Every scraped knee. Every heartache. Every holiday. I was there. And now, I'm not even on the group text. There was a photo last week, them at the lake, Grace, Tom, the grandkids, a picnic blanket and matching t-shirts. I stared at it longer than I should have. Not because I wasn't invited, but because no one even thought to lie about it. That's when you know, when they stop pretending you matter. The worst part? It's not the forgetting. It's that I let it happen. I made it easy to be overlooked. Smiled when I should have spoken, said, "It's fine," when it wasn't. I let them shrink me down into something convenient, background noise, a familiar pair of hands. But I wasn't always like this. I used to fill rooms. I used to be the reason they laughed, the one they leaned on. I was the pulse of that family. And now, I'm a shadow on the wall. But shadows know the shape of the light, and I still remember who I was. So the next time they call, and they will, maybe I won't answer on the first ring. Or maybe, just maybe, I'll let it go to voicemail, just to see if they notice. It's still there, second drawer down, right side of the bed, folded neatly, no envelope, no stamp. I wrote it the night after Grace's birthday dinner. They sat me at the end of the table, near the kitchen door. You know, the spot for leftovers and the ones they don't expect to say much. I watched them toast her with glasses I once picked out at a flea market in Vermont. They didn't know that. Or maybe they did. Doesn't matter now. I brought a pie, homemade, still warm. Rebecca set it aside without looking, said Linda had already brought dessert, store-bought tiramisu. I said nothing, of course, just smiled and reached for the water jug they forgot to pass me. That was the moment it happened. Not the forgetting of the pie, not the seat placement, but the water. No one saw I was thirsty. After dinner, I rode home in Tom's car. He didn't ask me how I was doing. He talked about work, about the rising rent on their beach house, as if I'd ever had the luxury of a second home. I nodded, even laughed at the right spots. I know how to be polite. But inside, something had shifted. That night, I made myself tea, chamomile, sat by the window and listened to the wind rustle through the hedges. I didn't cry, but I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote them a letter. Not all of them, just Grace, Tom, and Rebecca. The ones I raised with hands that cracked from soap and cold water. The ones I stayed up for and cooked for and covered with every piece of warmth I had. I didn't write it to be cruel. I wrote it to be clear. I told them I remembered the nights they were sick, when I held buckets and foreheads and stayed awake even after working double shifts. I told them I remembered their birthdays, every year, even when we had nothing but pancake mix and borrowed candles. I reminded them of the job interviews I missed to drive them to soccer, the dresses I didn't buy so they could have what they wanted, the arguments I swallowed for their peace. I wrote, "You don't owe me the past, but don't pretend it didn't happen." I listed the moments, not to accuse, but to mark them, like footprints they've long since walked over. I didn't use angry words. I used true ones. I wrote, "I know you're busy. I know life is loud, but I was once the sound in your life, the heartbeat, the home. I was not a background character. I was the whole stage for a while." I told them how it felt to be talked over, to have my stories waved away, or worse, repeated by them as their own. To bring food and have it left untouched. To give advice that gets ignored until someone younger says it louder. I ended it simply. I don't want apologies. I don't even want change. I just want you to know what you've done and what I did for you. Then I folded the paper and put it in the drawer. Didn't sign it. Didn't even date it. Because it's not a message I wanted to send. It's a message I wanted to survive. There's a kind of strength in unsent letters. You don't write them to hurt. You write them so your truth doesn't vanish with your silence. Some nights I take it out and read it again. Not to wallow, just to remember that I once mattered. That even if they forget, even if they rewrite the story, I still know what I carried. And carrying, that was always my job. The groceries, the grief, the holidays, the weight of everyone else's needs. But this letter, this was mine. No one asked for it. No one will read it. But I wrote it anyway. That's something they don't teach you as a mother. How to grieve the living. How to miss people who still stand in front of you. How to speak without speaking. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever hand it to them. Maybe when I'm gone. Maybe it'll be found under a half-used box of tissues and old reading glasses. And maybe, just maybe, one of them will sit on the edge of my bed and unfold it with shaking fingers. Maybe the silence will press in then, heavy and thick. And maybe they'll whisper, "I didn't know." But I'll know. We hadn't dined together in months, maybe longer. Tom said Lisa wanted to go someplace elegant, someplace with cloth napkins and wine that came with a tasting note. He said it like a joke, but I knew it wasn't. So I suggested Emery's on Main. Lisa raised an eyebrow. That place, isn't it hard to get in? I just smiled and said I'd handle the reservation. They didn't know. Not really. They'd forgotten, or maybe never bothered to ask, that Emery wasn't just a name painted on glass. It was mine. We arrived just before sunset. The city lights hadn't come on yet, but the sky had that soft blue-pink hue I always loved, like the day was trying to hold on just a little longer. Lisa walked ahead in her heels. Tom followed, adjusting his cufflinks. I moved slowly behind them. My legs don't work like they used to, but my memory does. The same black and gold door, the same warm smell of rosemary and lemon butter drifting from the kitchen. I'd once stood in that same doorway with dishwater on my hands and Harold's debts hanging heavy on my back, but that was a lifetime ago. The young hostess looked up and smiled when she saw me. "Good evening, Miss Emery." Not ma'am, not grandma, Miss Emery. Lisa turned. I caught the flicker of confusion in her eyes. Tom blinked. "Wait, you know each other?" Before I could answer, the manager came around the corner. David. He used to sweep the back steps when he was 16. Now he wore a navy suit and a silver tie. He hugged me gently. "Always a pleasure to have you here." Then he turned to my son. We're honored to host Miss Emery tonight. The chef's already preparing her usual. My usual? You'd think it would have clicked right then. But Tom just chuckled and said something about VIP treatment. Lisa smiled politely, the way people do when they're waiting for the part that makes sense. We were seated at the window. Candlelight flickered across the white tablecloth. I ordered the lamb. Lisa asked for a gluten-free option and stared at the menu like it had personally insulted her. Tom ordered wine he couldn't pronounce. I watched them eat. I listened as they talked about rising mortgage rates and daycare schedules. I nodded. I laughed at the appropriate moments. And then Lisa leaned in, tilting her head just slightly. "So, how do you know the manager?" I set down my fork. "He used to work for me," I said it softly. No pride, no flourish, just the truth. Tom frowned. "What do you mean, for you?" I looked out the window for a moment. The street lights had come on. The glass caught their glow like a memory returning home. "I bought this place years ago, after your father passed." I could feel the silence settle across the table, thick and sudden. Lisa blinked. "Wait, you own Emery's?" I smiled faintly. "I did, for a long time. Still hold the original deed. Sold most of the operations, but the name stays. That was part of the agreement." Tom's face flushed. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" I folded my napkin slowly. "You never asked." They didn't touch their dessert, but I finished mine. Chocolate torte. Still made the way I taught the first pastry chef who couldn't get it quite right. When the bill came, Lisa reached for her purse. Tom reached for his phone. But the waiter shook his head. "It's been taken care of," he said, nodding toward me. No one said a word on the ride home. Tom walked me to my door. He looked like he wanted to speak, but didn't. Just kissed my cheek and said, "Good night, Mom." Not Ma, not Mom, Mom. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it for a while. You wait so long to be seen again, you almost forget what it feels like. But that night, they remembered my name. Not as a guest, not as a favor, as the woman who once built something while they weren't looking. It's a simple chair, wooden, worn smooth from years of use. The kind of chair you don't notice until someone isn't in it. It's tucked near the front window of the cafe, my cafe, though no one calls it that anymore. The sign says Emery's Corner now. New owners, new paint, new menus, but the bones are mine. And the chair, well, that's mine too. They placed a little plaque beside it last year. I didn't ask for it. I didn't even know they were planning it. One morning, I came in, like I always do, just before the breakfast crowd. The sun was slanting through the windows, lighting up the honey-colored floorboards. I ordered my usual, black coffee, side of toast, and there it was, right next to the window seat, small and brass, Miss Evelyn's chair, where stories begin. I laughed when I saw it, a real laugh, the kind that comes up from the chest. The manager, a kind girl named Bella with frizzy hair and bright red glasses, just grinned. "We figured it was time," she said. "Most of the customers ask about you anyway." So now that's where I sit, every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday, near the window, facing the morning sun. It started slow, a nod here, a wave there, but then people began stopping by. Strangers mostly, curious souls with soft eyes and time to listen. There was a young man once, probably 20, maybe younger. He sat across from me and said, "You look like you've seen things." I smiled. "I have." So I told him about the winter the pipes froze and I boiled snow to make tea. About the time I patched Grace's prom dress with fishing line because the thread had run out and the shops were closed. About the first customer who ever walked into this place, a man with dirt under his nails and tired eyes who left a thank you note under his plate. I don't embellish. I don't need to. Truth, when told gently, doesn't need polish. People stay. They listen. Sometimes they cry. Sometimes they laugh so hard they have to wipe their eyes with napkins. Sometimes they just hold my hand for a while. And you know what? No one looks at their phone. That's the part that surprises me most. At first, I thought it might make me sad, sharing these stories with strangers instead of my own family. But there's a freedom in being heard without expectation. These people don't owe me history. They don't carry guilt. They just show up. Tom hasn't visited in weeks. Grace sends the occasional photo of the grandkids. Rebecca called last month, needed help finding a notary. But they don't sit with me, not here. They pass by the cafe sometimes. I've seen them through the window. They glance in, see me in my chair, and keep walking. I used to wave. Now I don't. I just sip my coffee, let the sun hit my face. Bella keeps fresh flowers on the table, yellow ones usually. She says they remind her of me, soft but not fragile. There's comfort in routine, in people who learn your name not because they have to, but because they want to. There's an old man who comes in every Sunday just to ask for one more story. A young mother who says her baby calms when I hum. A retired teacher who brings me books she thinks I'll like. They make space for me, not out of obligation, out of something warmer, respect maybe, or wonder, or maybe just simple kindness. I don't sit at their table anymore, my children's I mean, but I found a better one, quieter, gentler, one where my stories don't bounce off distracted ears. And that chair, it fits me just right. I know what they were waiting for. The moment the lawyer folded his hands, they leaned forward, like it was a game show and they'd buzzed in just in time. Lisa had a notepad. Rebecca wore heels. Grace had her arms crossed so tightly her rings pressed red marks into her skin. Tom sat beside me, trying to look calm, but I could feel his foot tapping under the table. He thought I didn't notice. I noticed everything. It was a Tuesday. I wore blue, not for any reason, just because it felt quiet. The lawyer, a young man with good posture and eyes that kept checking the clock, began to read. He spoke with the kind of voice people use when they've practiced grief in the mirror. I didn't need grief. I needed clarity. And so my will gave them what they expected, at first, just enough to keep them from embarrassing themselves. Each of them got something, a little here, a little there, a check, a piece of jewelry, the house, but only the house, not the land it sat on. They didn't understand that part yet. I'd thought about this for years, what to leave, what to hold back, not out of bitterness, but because I finally realized something. The things that mattered most, they never asked about. Not once did they ask about the keys and the blue tin under the stairs, or the letters in the cedar box, or the deed I signed in pencil hidden inside a copy of Wuthering Heights. Tom never asked who helped me pay off the mortgage. Grace never asked how I bought the cafe when I was still washing dishes and hiding overdue bills in the bread box. Rebecca never asked what I gave up to send her to college, the job I lost, the friend I turned down, the life I didn't chase. They all assumed. And assumptions make greedy hands. So I kept the real things for someone else. Her name is Ella. She's not blood, just heart. She used to serve tables at the cafe back when she was 19 and scared of everything. I taught her how to balance trays, how to calm angry customers, how to tie her apron so it wouldn't slip. She taught me how to use email and how to laugh again, the kind that doesn't sound like apology. She sat with me on Sundays, asked questions no one else thought to ask, listened when I spoke about the years when the house felt more like a burden than a home. So one winter, I started writing her letters, not formal, just thoughts, recipes, things I'd forgotten I knew. I wrote them on yellow paper and folded them neatly. I tucked one into her coat pocket once, and she came back the next day with tears in her eyes and banana bread in her hands. She got the land, all of it. Every inch behind the house and the plot beside the cafe. I left her the cedar box and the tin with the keys. I left her the journals I kept from the year Harold died, not because they're pretty, but because they're real, and real things are hard to come by. The lawyer paused when he reached her name. Tom blinked like he'd misheard. Grace let out a sound, not quite a gasp, not quite a word. Rebecca just stared. She's not family, someone said. I don't remember who, and I smiled. No, I said, she's not. She stayed anyway. They didn't understand. They thought this was punishment. They thought it was some final twisted lesson. But it wasn't. It was honesty. I gave them what matched the effort, and I gave Ella what matched the love. Because love is labor. It shows up. It doesn't just call when it needs something. An inheritance, true inheritance, isn't always a check or a house or a slice of a life you never helped build. Sometimes it's a key to a garden someone else planted, to a story still unfolding, to a door they never noticed was locked. They left quickly after that. No hugs, no thank yous, just silence and the sound of chair legs dragging across the floor. Ella stayed behind. She folded the papers carefully, like they were sacred. Then she looked at me and said, "I'll take care of it." And I believe her. I never liked yelling, not when I was a mother of 3, trying to stretch $5 into dinner, not when Harold slammed doors on his way out, and certainly not when he came back in. Even then, I stayed quiet, measured, not because I was afraid, but because I knew silence lasts longer than noise. There's a kind of strength in being still, in not reacting when they expect you to, in letting people think they've won until they realize you never joined the game. I used to think power was something other women had, women in suits, with loud shoes and louder opinions. I was just Evelyn, with soft hands, sensible shoes, and too many pots on the stove. But I see it now. Power isn't volume, it's presence. It's sitting in the same chair they once rolled their eyes at and having the entire room turn when you lift your teacup. Last Thursday, I walked into Emery's just as the lunch crowd was thinning. The young man at the counter smiled, a real smile, not the kind you're paid to give. "Your table's ready, Miss Evelyn," he said. My table. Imagine that. The same corner where I used to scrub the floor on my knees before the health inspector came. Now it's the place with the best light, the best view, the best seat in the house. As I sat, I caught the sound of laughter. 3 women, younger than Grace, maybe in their 40s, dressed sharp, expensive perfume clinging to the air. They were seated by the fireplace, same place my children once whispered about me. One of them saw me. She lowered her voice. The laughter faded. It wasn't fear. I don't inspire fear. But there's something about being looked at, really looked at, and seen as someone who knows things. Not gossip, not secrets, but life. People feel it, even if they don't understand it. A waiter brought me tea without asking what kind. Jasmine, my favorite. He also brought a note, folded neatly under the saucer. "Thank you for everything you built. I hope I make you proud. B. Bella." I ran my thumb across the paper, slow and careful. My name wasn't on the note, but I knew it was meant for me. That's power. Not the kind that comes with applause or plaques or family praise, but the kind that grows quietly in a woman who never needed permission to matter. My children still don't understand it. Grace sent a message last week, something clipped and awkward. "I saw that article about the restaurant. People talk about you like you're royalty." As if it surprised her, as if she'd never thought to ask what I'd done with the decades they left me alone. I didn't respond, not because I was angry, because I didn't feel the need to explain. That's another kind of cower, not explaining yourself. Letting your life speak without footnotes. Sometimes young women come sit across from me, notebooks in hand. They ask about recipes, but they stay for the stories. They lean forward. They nod. They cry. They say things like, "I didn't know it could be done that way." And I tell them, yes, it can, but you have to do it soft, steady, quiet enough that they never see you coming. A soft woman is not a weak woman. I learned that after 50 years of being dismissed, talked over, used, and forgotten. Softness is choosing not to become what the world did to you. It's choosing tea over fury, grace over revenge. Not because you have no fire, but because you've learned how to control the flame. So now when I walk past that old table, the one where Tom once chuckled behind his hand, the one where Lisa smirked as if I couldn't possibly understand stocks or deeds or the language of power, I don't stop. I walk by, my shoulders square, my chin lifted, and not a soul at that table dares laugh.